I looked at 3,000 firms. And whenever I say that during my search, everyone would laugh at me or be like, "You're so picky," or "What's wrong with you?" And I'm like, well, I had to find the one.
Welcome to So You Want to Buy a Business. My name is Kira Hamilton. I'm your host, and my guest today is Yvette Owo. In this episode, Yvette and I chat about her recent acquisition and her overall plan for an accounting firm roll-up. Let's get into it. Yvette, welcome to So You Want to Buy a Business. I'm so excited to chat with you today. Thank you for joining me. Let's start with an introduction. Can you tell us who you are and what you do?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. And thank you to everyone who's there listening because we do this for you. My name is Yvette Owo, and I own a couple accounting businesses. I'm doing an accounting roll-up. And I'm more excited about what I'm doing now than anything else I've done in my life.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, I want to get into that and hear why you're so excited about it. So, Yvette, let's start with this roll-up plan. You already have an accounting firm. What made you decide to go and pursue further acquisitions?
Yeah, so it starts a little further back. So I had a job working as a corporate strategist, and I planned some of the really large acquisitions, like $35 billion deals. Um, and for my last one, I was planning a couple of business units that were the reason for the whole $35 billion shebang. And I was much younger than everyone. And we kind of drew straws, and I just got the hardest one. And it was so much fun. And then I was writing a paper on it, and I realized that people understood acquisitions from like a financial perspective and sometimes a operational perspective, but they rarely got the human side of it. And it just clicked for me. And I like when there's a lot of complexity that involves numbers, people, and the most complexity you can do is try to throw two businesses together or try to buy a business you don't understand. And so I just like that spaghetti, right? And so that's really interesting to me. And I had done enough of them, and I realized that the deeper I got, I really liked that spaghetti. So I knew I liked acquisitions. And earlier in my life, in my 20s, I was hit by a car. And so I'd created a lot of pain. I'd left that job. And for about 5 to 7 years, I had this hypothesis that I could help SMBs grow net income. So by taking my experience, I'd worked at so many Fortune 500 companies as a consultant, multiple industries, and I'd done, like everything from financial services, insurance, uh, TV, telecom, oil and gas. I mean, just a lot of stuff. And so it worked. Like I think of them kind of like moving pieces on a chessboard. So it's not like making these massive changes, but just incremental improvements. And like one company went from like 180K to like 3.4 million in 2 years, same headcount, shut down during COVID. And it was just, continuous improvement. Like you might think of with a basketball team that is having a rebuilding year. I'm not the biggest sports person. I just like a little bit of sports stuff for business. Um, but so I had that hypothesis. So I loved acquisitions. I had this hypothesis that you could what's called professionalize small businesses. And if you put those two together, then you buy a business, then you own it, and then you go professionalize and help grow it and etc. And then those things are happening. And then separately, I think I just heard of someone. So this is actually pretty random. I haven't thought about it in a while. While I was living in New York, one of my neighbors, I was talking to one of my neighbors, and he was like, "You sound like this guy I know. This guy's like 60 something years old. I mean, you're much younger, but you talk very much like him when you talk about work. The way you approach things, your mindset. You should look him up. He just sold $100 million business." And this wasn't the first time someone has compared me to someone who's very successful um, in something that's much older. But I looked him up, and he did some kind of roll up. And I was like, huh. So then I started looking into roll ups, and I was like, huh, that seems like fun. And that's kind of how it came to be, the idea of a roll up. And then I specifically chose accounting for specific reasons. But that's how the idea of a roll up came to be.
I love the spaghetti metaphor. You want to be in the excitement of it. That's cool. So your current firm is called YOLO Accounting. Did you acquire that or did you start that one up yourself?
I started YOLO, and I started YOLO knowing that I was going to acquire.
Did you know from the beginning the timeline that you wanted to acquire on, or how did you know you were ready to take that next step and add an acquisition?
Oh, yesterday. My timeline was yesterday. So, because of I mentioned I was hit by a car. So what I had been holding me back from acquiring was my health, and so I basically decided some things that happened in business, and I decided anything I do, I wanted to own, and I was done with the with being a consultant of any business of any size of any type, and because I worked as a consultant as an employee, I had a consulting business, and I was like, no, it's time to acquire, and so then I really it's happened a few times in my life where I just really dialed in and being just healthy enough. That was my focus, being just healthy enough to do this. And I was like, all right, I am. And along the journey of, an acquisition takes time, we'll keep getting healthier. And so it was more of, I really want to do this. And the number one thing holding me back is my health. And I will give a massive shout out. I was interviewing business coaches, and I had to find, so when people see me, they see a confident, articulate, this woman, blah, 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 maybe gorgeous. Okay, beautiful, whatever. Okay, let's do that again. When people, that's a little too egotistical. When people see me, they see this, you know, confident, maybe good looking, maybe, um, you know, well spoken, put together person. And then when I tell people I have a chronic health issue, that if you really wanted to understand it, you'd have to have someone in your life that has cancer or MS or lupus. It doesn't really connect. So whenever I have people in my business life, they don't connect with me as a whole person. So if I say I have two kids, people know what that means.
Hmm.
But if you say you were hit by a car and you have chronic health issues, and I don't even say publicly the specific names because then I start to get all this random, not super helpful advice. People don't get what that means. Like there are days like yesterday, every time I stood up, I had pain. And I would constantly find a business coach who used to be a nurse. So when we would meet and he's like, oh yeah, I get it. You're feeling good right now, so you can show up. But when you tell me you're feeling bad, he knows that people can go from being on a conversation and looking what's quote unquote normal to being bedridden for a few hours or for a day or in massive pain or have crazy brain fog in a 5, 10, or multi-hour space, and that it's real. And so that was something that was actually a fantastic game changer. So he helped me by um, being the first person in my business life to actually understand in any level of accuracy the severity of what I was going through.
I want to get back to talking about your acquisition, but I do want to ask another question about this topic because I think it's important. Is there anything else that you'd like people to know about what it's like to live with chronic health issues, what it's like to live with chronic pain?
I mean, I guess what I would it's also I would like people to hold space for empathy. You can't, having lived it, you can't know what it's like until you physically go through it. But I would like people to just believe the words that come out of someone else's mouth, even if they haven't had the experience. If you know what it's like to, like, I sometimes I would say, when you have kids and they're a baby and you gotta like pack all the stuff and it takes forever to get out the house. Well, imagine you're the baby and the adult. That's what it was like when it was the worst. I had to pack all this stuff in case this happened, in case this happened. And so just listen to someone if they say, I can't do dinner after 6 p.m. because I've got to be home to rest. I Being home to rest is an actual activity that I need to do. So I would just ask if people could just you don't have to have the experience. Just believe the words are coming out of their mouth and just hold some space for the fact that they're living a different life than yours.
I think that's so important. Trust what people say, especially when they're having an experience that's different than your own. You don't have to have felt what someone else is feeling or be in their position just to believe them and to trust what they're saying and to hear what they need. So, thank you for sharing that. I think that's really important for folks. So you got to a point where you're saying you felt healthy enough to take on this new challenge, pursue another acquisition. Tell me a little bit about how you started your search. What was
Yeah.
your criteria in looking for another deal?
Yeah, so in looking for this deal, I'm laughing because I built this intern team that I absolutely love. I've tried to shut them down twice now, but they're now self perpetuating its own program. And you can definitely apply for your oil company's internship. Um, but basically, I do things as a team. I live life as a team sport. That's just kind of my vibe. So most people search and they feel it's very lonely and they do it alone. What I did was I went and I built an intern team. And, the first round of the team wasn't great. We had one rock star that got two investment banking internships from his experience at YOLO and actually modeled things that got sent to the bank and did final review. And is coming back. He's actually leaving for the internships and then coming back in the fall because YOLO is home for him. So um, it was really finding a team and then building culture. So the same way people think about culture in any company, I think about it with any team. So we have SOPs. We have a standard we look at 425 deals on an average week, like the initial teasers. By we, I mean they look at it. There's certain criteria. If it passes all the criteria, then the NDA gets signed. There's qualitative and financial analysis that's like a template model, and then questions that they answer, and then they send it to me, and then I look at that, and then I look at the sim, and then there's another level of analysis, and then I talk to the broker. So I built this whole system that one allowed me to look at more deals. Two, it gave them fantastic experience. So like when this kid was interviewing, he was like, wait, hold on. I'm actually doing the same thing at the bank that I've been doing for you. like the it's literally the same stuff. And in some ways, you gave me more freedom and more exposure than they're going to. So yeah, having a team allowed me to look at a ton of deals. It gave me people to talk to. Um, Even to the point also when you have to talk to someone who's really young, you have to teach a lot. So you have to be one more patient than you normally are, at least than I normally am. But you also really have to understand what you're talking about because you have to communicate it to someone who's learning it. So that really pushes you a lot, like to your point, like you asked what was my criteria. So I wanted a minimum of two managers that had been there at least 2 years. I wanted to have processes. I wanted to have some level of diversity of revenue, so not just 100% tax income. There's some types of revenue I didn't want. I didn't want a lot. I didn't want a lot of payroll because it's lower margin. So I wanted more focus on business owners. And so, well, if I want them to screen for that, for them to really do it well, they don't just see the criteria. They have to understand why. Well, if I have more non-tax revenue, I have more consistent revenue throughout the year, which means my team isn't as burnt out, which means I don't have my revenue isn't as just high and then low because there's like in the accounting industry, there's some months where you can actually have a loss because tax season makes up for it, which then means you work insane hours during even more insane hours during tax season. So I had to explain all of those things for them to understand it, to really get it, and to explain it at that level of detail and frequently. I had to get really clear about it. So it was a lot, but I think that answered a lot about like just my approach to the search that was a little bit different and how they helped me by pushing me to get super clear and forcing a lot of patience.
So let's talk about the company that you ended up acquiring. Just for context for our listeners, we're recording this in late May. We're probably going to release it a little bit later because you do have some aspects of your transaction and your transition that you're still wrapping up. But yeah, let's talk about the company you ended up acquiring. Tell me about it and how did you know it was the right fit for you?
For those on audio, I'm laughing, smiling right now because I'm so happy. So I say I looked at 3,000 firms, and whenever I say that during my search, everyone would laugh at me or be like, "You're so picky," or "What's wrong with you?" And I'm like, "Well, I had to find the one." And it's like one thing that was important to me is process efficiency. Um, Any good business needs to have good processes. That's a big part of what separates small businesses from big ones. Big ones have processes. And if you buy something that has no one and you bring them all in, then you'll probably turn over all the staff. So that was really important. This firm had good processes. I want to make more things digital, but they have really good paper processes and some digital also. I also wanted the seller to have a lot of credibility, or sorry, integrity, a lot of integrity. So I feel like he and I have a lot of aligned values. Actually, the reason he started this firm back in 2004 is the same reason that I wanted to be in this space. He was in a CFO role, and he found that SMBs, small medium sized businesses, weren't getting quality advice for accounting and finance. And because I had been working with small businesses for the past 5 to 7 years after working with Fortune 500, and I had cycled through CPAs after reviewing my taxes, and I had had people actually, because I knew CPAs, like call me and be like, hey, my CPA actually did this really sketchy thing. How do I get the papers from them without them knowing I'm changing? So I'd had all these unique experiences helping businesses with their, financial side of their business, reviewing my own taxes, and then people just calling me as a trusted person for help because they didn't know what to do with this part of their business life. And then I also knew that the industry is pretty fragmented, and there's a huge difference in the talent in like a Big Four, Big Ten, Fortune 500 regional player and what SMBs get. And with my background, I could bring quality talent. So when I saw this firm, I was like, okay, this guy started the firm for the same reason that I want to be in this space, is to help SMBs get quality talent. So it was like a continuation of his legacy. And there was a real matching in terms of both of us feeling like that.
I'm interested to know more about the financial side of the deal.
Yeah.
Anything about the financial structure you're comfortable sharing and your experience in getting financing for it?
Yeah. So on the financial side, there's definitely there's a seller note. The only thing I'll say about that is I would do more now that I would have done an even higher seller note now. Not that anything bad has happened, but now that I'm on the other side of it, I think you get even more clarity. But there was definitely a seller note, which I think is necessary in any deal, because so that you guys are more aligned on the same side. Um, I did an SBA loan, and I actually initially was going to do a non-SBA loan because sometimes you can get that. Professional services business can get different types of loans in other businesses. And I had a banker at Frost Bank basically lead me on to the fact that maybe that could happen. And then it was like, no, actually, we don't do loans like this at all. And then I had kind of reached out to someone about it because it kind of delayed our deal by about a month. So it was pretty stressful for myself, the broker, and the seller. And the guy who had been sick, I'd waited on him, and it turned out so this is just, I want something to know from education. A lot of times, bankers, some of them will do that where they know your deal actually won't go through, but they're developing a relationship with you so that by the time they tell you that underwriting said no, you'll come back and open a depository account there because they make a commission off of that. And so when he finally said no, I asked him what his bank's underwriting terms are, and I was like, you knew in the first 5 minutes that this deal wouldn't be approved by underwriting. And he's like, well, I didn't have the paperwork in front of me. And I was like, there's absolutely no way that this would have been approved. So it was definitely frustrating. And of the entire deal process, this month was the most difficult. So kind of when I get in a bad spot, I tend to go in the complete opposite of turn it into a strength. So then I went and reached out to like 7+ different banks and bank lenders, and I learned a ton about how banks approve, built relationships with a bunch of different bankers, the models that they use, how bankers communicate with the underwriters, how the underwriter communicates with the creditor, with the credit team, what the process was. So then I just really developed really great relationships with bankers and learned about the bank process. And like underwriters, for example, usually don't like talk to you. My underwriter called me the day after Christmas. So I turned that, which was a weakness, into becoming a strength. And I still have a relationship with even the banks that ended up not moving forward with. I still have a relationship with them. And then I also learned things like the range, right? Like for this same deal, the cash, because of the way I structured the seller's equity, the seller note, so that it could be eligible for the equity down payment from the buyer. I was asked anywhere from $5,000 to 250 some odd $1,000. So most people don't realize there's a huge range in how much a bank can ask you for depending on their own internal policies. So yeah, so in terms of my structure, there was a seller note. I won't say my number. It wasn't the 5,000 number, but it definitely wasn't the 250 number. And I also think about, like, also had different interest rates and a principal only period and a no month, a zero. I'm not repaying back in the first few months, and then I have a principal only period, and then we go back to full repayment. So there are all these different terms. And then also, like, do I think the bank's going to close? Does the bank actually have the ability to get there? Because banks will occasionally ghost people, like dating. So yeah, I ended up going with Live Oak Bank, very happy with the experience that I had there. And they also have an accounting vertical. Shout out to Eric, he was my dude. I'm about to give the whole team's name, but I obviously like them a lot. So I think all those things were really critical in the deal for alignment and just feeling comfortable that we would actually get to close.
There's a lot of nuance, even just within SBA, and you're definitely speaking to that. And it's really important to find a lender that you trust and that you're comfortable with. And to your point, that you have the confidence in to actually close the deal, because it sounds like you had some delays in your process due to working with lenders that weren't a great fit, right?
Yeah, and actually, I forgot about this, but I also had one. I had a lender that I had worked with, and I thought it was someone I could trust. And then we were at a conference, and he kept touching me. And I had like told him, like, don't touch my hair. He brought his hands on my shoulders, and I was like, this is not okay. And I actually emailed him, and I was like, this was inappropriate. Several people noticed it, talked to me about it. You made everyone uncomfortable. I'm not sharing like this with people, but just don't communicate with me again, because it's only going to lose leads for your business. So that was also another thing that made it a very difficult situation, that this person I had developed trust with then was violating that trust in an inappropriate manner. And that's why I ended up going with a new relationship that then didn't work out. So then I was like, okay, I really have to get this, like, be in a position of strength here, because I've now had two people, one from a business perspective, one from an inappropriate perspective, violate my trust.
I'm sorry to hear that. That's such an easy rule to follow. Don't touch people. Don't touch people in a professional setting. It should be very straightforward, and that's disappointing to hear that people violated that basic expectation. I'm sorry to hear that happened. So you ended up finding a lending partner who was a good fit for you. When did you actually close the deal?
Yeah, and we did something most people don't. We did what's called a non-simultaneous close. So we signed the purchase agreement, which is the contract to do the deal, in January, but it's busy season, which is mid-January, so it was very stressful to change ownership, and so we didn't actually close until April 19th, the very first Friday after tax deadline.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So for businesses that have that are a little cyclical, that's a really good option if someone hasn't thought about that before, regardless of any industry. So that way you're not trying to do all the change stuff also in the most stressful time for your business and your clients and your employees.
I think that's a great thing to bring up, because some people may not be aware that that's a structure that they can utilize, and it could make a lot of sense, like you're saying, in businesses that are seasonal. So you closed about a month and a half ago. What has the
Yeah.
transition been like for you? Tell us about your experience so far.
Oh my God, it has been fantastic. So this is where I say, like, I love this more than anything. First, I really love the whole deal process. I love my intern team. What actually, a guy from Goldman is planning to leave to join the team. One of my interns was interviewing with Goldman, so I love like bringing people on, And then with the transition, I was like, okay, I know we need a transition plan. I know how to do one, but there's a level of detail where I just don't like it.
Mm.
And also, I have to take care of my health. I've been through a really intense period. Um, I'm about to go to another one, which is post close. This is a great time to like rest, which rest for me. I told my friend I was working a lot, and I was like, "Yeah, I'm stopping at 5." She was like, "Oh my gosh, you're ridiculous." Um, so I actually did a pretty detailed transition plan, and I brought in a friend of mine who I'd worked with at Accenture, Kim Smith. Shout out to you, you're fantastic. And we planned out the first 4 weeks, and we did it with the seller and the CEO, and we were like, "Here's some things we're thinking about." And so there are things I was thinking about from week one, like an assessment. They were like, they kind of made a reaction, facial reaction, and we were like, "Okay, hold on, that probably means it's not a good culture fit." So we planned such a detailed transition. Like we had specific activities. Basically, the entire first week was choreographed. Everything I did for the I went to lunch with every single person. There were team lunches. There were team one-on-ones. We had anonymous surveys, and we had trend lines. We had word clouds. And so by day 5 of me in the business, because I started on a Tuesday, so day 5 is Monday, they took a survey, and they said they were over half the team said they were more excited, including the seller, now than any time they had ever worked in the business.
Wow, that's really impressive.
Yeah, and I still have the first day like where they're like, "Who are you? You're gonna ruin our business. You're gonna whatever." Like so. I'm not saying like none of that happened. What I'm saying is I was ready. I was ready for it, and it was tailored for the team and who I am. Right. There was a mix of two like a who Yvette's personality is and the culture she wants and the existing culture.
Can you give some examples? I mean, you mentioned doing one-on-one with folks, getting to know
Yeah.
people, doing surveys. Can you give any other examples of how did you get people to a place where they were feeling this excitement? I mean, I think a transition like this, it's natural for it to be a bit tumultuous, maybe
Yes.
for people to be skeptical of what
Yes.
things are going to be like looking forward. So can you speak more to what were some of the things you did to get this success?
Yeah. So I guess there's a couple things. One thing that actually turned out to help is the seller and them they had a people issue right before close, and they told me about it, which again, back to integrity, not everyone would. I helped them through it. And in my helping them through it, like they were calling me, we were talking three hours a week of me giving them guidance. And that developed more trust in my leadership style and my people skills. And that's a big strength of what I bring to the table. So that actually turned into an advantage in terms of our relationship. And we were doing that alongside the transition planning. So now when I get there, one of the things I said it was, I don't know, it was like week 1, week 2, I remember. No, I'm 100% sure I said this the first day. You don't trust me, and that's okay. Right? So he introduced me. He said good things about me. They're happy he's retiring because they actually were also do care about him and they want him to stop working. Right? So people have both feelings. They love him, they want to stop working, but then they're like, okay, who are you? You're a terrible human. You bought my business. You bought the business, and then. But I said, like, you don't trust me, and that's okay, and you don't have to right now, and frankly, you don't have to ever. And so then that gives people the space to be like, oh, she gets us and she's
Mm.
not forcing it. In one meeting, I specifically said we had one person that was really pushing back, and I was like, you don't have to trust anything I do. Some people will trust things before they happen. Some people will trust things as they happen, and some people will trust them after they happen. You can be whichever one you choose to be. And I was talking to one person who was particularly pushing back, and then another one in the room goes, and I do this a lot in meetings. What was the most valuable thing you heard? And she said, the fact that I don't have to trust you. And this is someone who has a lot of anxiety. Like her hands were literally shaking the first day, like for the first 3 days, whenever I would stand next to her. And now she's also the person who I work most one-on-one with on the team. And her role has changed. I challenge her on a regular basis. Like I send emails like, I'm sure you have the critical thinking skills to solve this problem. So come back with proposals. And I'm only a month and a half in, and she's doing a fantastic job. And she's, exceeded my expectations, the team's expectations. So it was things like that. Like I just let people And I would say, going back to the health thing, it's having felt the emotions that I felt and and being misunderstood so often by so many people on a regular basis, I think actually helped me with the close, because I was like, you have the right to feel whatever you're feeling about me, right? Like, I'm not going to try to change that. But then in
Mm,
like some ones, I would say practical things like, if he didn't sell it, that means the business needs to shut down and you lose your job, right?
right.
So then they're like, oh, I never thought about it that way. The only way a business continues is if the owner never dies, which is impossible,
Yeah.
or you change ownership. So like there's the practicality of it and just like really simple, basic, like, we all want you to keep your job. And also you can feel whatever you want to feel. And I'm not going to try to I can influence, but I don't control. And even the fact that you don't like me has nothing to do with me because you don't even know me. So it's not personal to me. So I think really letting people hold space, which is not something we talk about much in acquisition space, that goes back to, I told you, when I was doing deals with big companies, I thought the people side was what everyone forgot about. And then I've had this experience of people misunderstanding me. So now I get into this space where normally you want to hard charge and have people accept you, or you're like, I'm going to soft pedal and they're going to slowly get used to me. No, they don't. They'll just realize that they can avoid you. And so I was just like, I'm going to do me in a paced, strategic, intentional manner. And you get to choose how you respond to that. And then I'll respond to how you respond.
Yvette, you just said a number of things that I thought were really interesting. So I want to talk about a couple points you made there. First off, you really paying attention to your relationship with the seller seems
Yes.
key. And I think that sometimes people overlook the importance of the seller relationship and can get very focused. I mean, I understand you're focused on the financials a lot, how
Yes.
well is this business run, etc. But your seller relationship is so important because,
Yes.
to your point, you could have had a different experience with this transition if the seller hadn't been transparent with you.
Yes.
And there is a lot of due diligence you can do on a company, but there are also things that a seller with not good intentions could hide, that you might not realize until you acquire a company. And working with someone who's transparent, who's going to bring issues to you, who's going to help you through that transition is key. I think I would only acquire a company if I felt comfortable with the seller, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I know people who acquired companies because the numbers were good and they knew their seller were lying to them. And then they found out they were lying more and they're going to sue them now. And or the other one, we don't know who's going to sue each other first. And the other thing is, even if your seller's being transparent, they're never telling you the whole truth, because we're all used to our own lives. When a
Mm,
new person comes in, and also like, we have different perspectives as different people.
sure.
So you have to have a good relationship, because no matter, unless you're there, you're always gonna find stuff that you didn't know about. And some of it is the person told you the truth from their perspective.
That's such a good point. They may not be intentionally misleading you. You may just have a different view on something, a different understanding. And they're like, well, I was transparent. This is how I see it. And you get in there and you're like, this is not my view of things.
Yeah. So it's really, and the seller still works for me. So the seller works for me. And so, I mean, obviously that's also important. And as we were ironing it out, I kept saying, we can put whatever we want on paper, but if either of us don't genuinely want to work together, it's not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Even if he stays, if he's not genuinely happy, like, most, not in a situation, but most employees quit their job about at least 6 months after they, emotionally got disconnected from it, right? So if he's emotionally disconnected, like, I did, he's not on my win team. So, and something unique I did fairly early on. Once there's a little bit of kind of, I call it a vet due diligence that I do before formal due diligence. I actually did a workshop with him during the due diligence phase. So in large deals, we do something called post merger integration. So I found a way to create it for this size deal, an SMB space. And I know a lot of people have bought accounting businesses, and I kind of was just like, what's everything that, like, can I curse here?
Oh, just, sure.
I was like, what's everything that got fucked up in the first 6 months? Like, what was all the worst shit that happened? And I just got a giant list and I created a successful transition workshop. So I flew out, he took time out of his day, and me, him, and the COO, we spent so much time together. So that we also spent so much time together that he could tell that I wasn't a liar, because he also needs to know that I have integrity.
Right.
So there's a minimum number of hours before you trust someone. The number of different rooms you're in together also help. And so we were half-day workshops plus lunch plus dinner. Oh, I also came on the weekend of my birthday, so they had birthday dinner with me. So that showed my commitment. So it showed my commitment. It also built a relationship. And then also back to trust, like I'd ask him questions and he'd pull it up on his laptop and I'd see him get it out of the data. So it's like, oh, I could also see how organized he was, so you can see a lot of things in real life, like how organized he is. He was like, wow, you're really good with the tech stuff. Like, okay, so you do Excel stuff really well. Like, so he could see kind of how I am in my native self, and I could see how he is in his native self, and we could see where the gaps were in terms of being different. Also, just through that experience, so that gives me, like, I knew he'd be more paper oriented. He's extremely more organized than me in certain ways, and in other ways, I'm more organized than he is. And he's very detailed, so I could see him pulling numbers straight from QuickBooks or straight from the database that he was telling me and then explaining it to me. And just that interaction was so important. It was really early on, and I really invested in that, and taking time. And he did too, because he took time out of his day to be there.
You really spent the time making sure that the relationship was there and that you could grow it with him. I want to come back to some other points you were making about how you transitioned.
Yeah.
I really love how you just said up front, you don't trust me and that's okay, or something along those lines.
Yeah.
Just naming that for people, I think probably set a tone that I'd imagine a lot of people, when they're transitioning into a new acquisition, maybe aren't thinking about how important it is to set that tone with employees. Just saying like, hey, I know you don't know me. And yes, I'm your boss now. I'm running this business, but I know we have some work to do to get to know each other. I thought it was interesting, and I don't remember exactly how you worded this, but something like, you don't trust me now and you don't have to trust me. I thought that was interesting because for me, it would feel important for employees at some point to trust me. So I'm curious to know more for you. Why would that not be necessary to you? And how would you work with an employee who didn't trust you?
I didn't say I don't think trust is important. I think it's absolutely important. And I just think some people give trust. Some people feel like trust needs to be earned. And you don't know who you're talking to. So I'm just giving you space to have whatever feelings you're going to have. And if you don't like me on day one of an acquisition, it has absolutely nothing to do with me. My goal as a leader and my job is to build trust. Now, on day one, as part of doing a good job at my job, is not trying to force it down your throat if you're not ready for it. So I think of it like people development, relationship development. It happens in stages. Some people are better at it than others. The more you can be more intentional about it. So it's not that it's absolutely important. There was someone who did leave the firm. And part of that was actually, I just had a really honest conversation with her. And I was like, hey, do you understand how much you're stressing everyone out? And she was like, what? And she kind of was like, what do you mean? And then we started talking about it. And she was like, I don't think I'm really helping by being here. Again, holding space for her to have that realization that, frankly, the leadership team had for a while, but no one had held space for that conversation. And it was that difficult conversation, and it's hard emotionally. But if we're struggling with her, she's struggling to be here, there's something else that she can do that will be a better fit, right? And we needed to give her that opportunity. And so going back to trust, I have a lot of trust in the people around me. The seller trusts me a lot. I trust the seller a lot. I mean, we're still building trust in many ways for sure. But I think, for day 5, for half the team to say that they're more excited about the business than they ever have been, including the seller, he wasn't even offended. He was like, I made the right choice. He was like, thank you for validating my decisions. It shows how quickly. So it was more about holding space and knowing that people need that space and that it's built incrementally. And it's not like I know these people either, right? So it's not like I trust all of you, like I'm still learning what you can do, what you like to do, who you are, and it's just being honest about that.
You can't control how other people feel, right? You
Yeah.
can only respond to how they're responding to you. So, I really like that. Yvette, I'd like to talk about representation in the
Yeah.
ETA space. You are a Black female entrepreneur. Women and Black folks are underrepresented in the ETA space, and
Yeah.
this is a complex question. I don't think there's a straightforward answer, but I'm curious to get your opinion on why do you think that is that there is underrepresentation, and do you have any ideas about how we as an ETA community can make a change in that way and allow more people, more
Yeah.
women and more Black folks, more people of color to be represented?
Well, I mean, I think it really reflects the populations, right? It doesn't start with ETA. So a lot of the people who go into ETA either go to top schools, top colleges. The people who come from top colleges usually come from top high schools. The people from top high schools usually come from top middle schools. Top middle schools come from top elementary schools. So it's a system in our society that rewards the people who are already rich and have money. And historically, there are certain types of people who did because, women weren't allowed to own. Women could get the first business loan in 1988. So if we couldn't even get a loan for a business until 1988, we're obviously not the people who were first in line or even thought of or have the track, or our parents and grandparents were teaching us how to be business owners. People of color still face. I mean, I'm afraid for my brother as a Black man driving out, who is kind of on the spectrum, and so he asks a lot of questions. I'm afraid for his physical safety, and this is 2024. Um, so we start with an unfair system, and that's just life. And then, on top of that, the jobs. So I did strategy consulting. A lot of people in this space do investment banking, they do IB. Those jobs also filter out women and people of color before they come from the same schools, right? So there's a pre-filtering before you even get to ETA. And then of the people in that job, some minority of them find out about ETA. And then there's some blessed people who figure this out when they're like 26, and I'm like, oh, I wish I figured that out then. So I think it's a reflection of a larger system that we're in. And to your answer of what we can do about it is, I think we have to give more exposure, right? Like more interviews with the people who are women, the people who are Black who are doing this. Like there are so many different stories. Like I'm active on SMBX, and we joke is like the average person on SMBX is about 32 to 36, white male Christian with about 2 kids. Like, I mean, we're not even just talking about gender, we're talking about religion, we're talking about age. It's so specific, right? But there are also, women on SMBX, and I'll try to get them to post more, and they'll be like, yeah, but I posted one time and I got so much hate because I said something about being a woman. Or one recently posted and people didn't like how she looked with the guy she was dating because he was too pretty, and she got, it's just, I think we really aren't, like, if you're not intentionally inclusive, you are not noticing that you're being exclusive. And not everyone's going to agree with me, and that's like fine. Again, hold space. But that's the reality of it. Like, it's like somebody, saying, I'm going to treat everyone equally. Okay, I have a knee brace on every day. So if you're going to treat everyone equally and you're going to do an activity that requires walking, and you don't consider the fact that I can't walk long distances on a regular basis, that's actually really not treating me appropriately, right? So we need to think about the fact that, like, if we're going to have conferences, let's make sure to have women speakers, because if we see male speakers all the time, then we're going to see ourselves. It's going to be easier to see yourself doing it if you're a man. If you see mostly white speakers all the time, it's going to be easier to see yourself. If you see more Hispanic, Black, Asian, Middle Eastern, mixed, whatever speakers, it's going to be easier to see yourself, right? And we need everyone, right? Like, we live in a large country, and we need everyone to feel that they can show up and do their best. And if you think about this on a bigger scale, like, the US has dominated the world economy since World War II, partially because Europe was so devastated and we sold so many resources to them, and that really helped us from an economic standpoint. I am not in any way promoting World War II, just to be clear. But the way that China is growing with their population, the fact that it's actually cool as a student in China to be a smart student, like, not here, it's not cool. Personal experience as a nerd. But in the next 30 years, if we want to continue to be the dominant economy, we are going to have to maximize the resources of every single person in America. So if you want to be pro America, you really have to be pro every single American, maximizing themselves, especially in a capitalistic country, especially in a world where basically, if you have the most money, which we do, the most nuclear arms, which we do, you control. So I think people can take whatever perspective they want, which is justice and fairness, which is representation. If you don't see yourself, it's hard. Or you could just be like, I actually don't care about Black people and women. I just want America to be number one. Well, if you want us to be number one, then you got to help everyone. Otherwise, China's going to win. That's what it is.
It's a pretty compelling argument. I hear what you're saying, and I feel very strongly about representation, but I also hear what you're saying with, women you've spoken to online, that it can be hard if you're maybe one of a few people stepping out into an online space of whatever demographic you're a part of. It can be hard to be those first people. So I really appreciate you taking the time out of your very busy schedule running these companies to speak with me and to be on this platform and to make yourself visible to other people. I really appreciate that, Yvette.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And thank you to everyone who listened. And again, I want to encourage, if little old Yvette with her knee brace could do this, you can do it in the space that you want to be in. Because I really think there's power in more of us owning businesses.
I absolutely agree. And before we wrap up, I'd like to hear a little bit about where do you want to go next? I know you just closed on this acquisition, but I also know you're a woman with a long-term plan. So what's next for you?
Yeah, speaking of what's next, I'm doing a roll-up. So if you know a great accounting firm with 1 million in EBITDA, a strong leadership team that focuses on SMBs, I'm interested. And I'm doing a roll-up. So I'm going to be buying several accounting firms. It was really important to me to self-fund this deal and bringing in capital going forward. There are already some people that have been talking to me since the first deal. So I'll be buying the goals to buy one or more businesses, accounting businesses specifically, every year, and really serve the SMB market between $1 to $50 million in revenue for a full service. So due diligence, business valuations, bookkeeping, accounting, CFO work, to help you grow your business, not just save on taxes. Like that's one thing that an accountant can do for you. But if you're a small business, you don't have a full finance, planning, and accounting organization like the big boys do. So let's bring it in and help you grow. Us numbers nerds will do the crunching, and you can focus on the thing you like, which is growing your business. And that's why the original business is called YOLO. You do what you like to do, we'll crunch the numbers.
Yvette, what is the best way for people to find you online and connect with you?
Yeah, you can connect with me on Twitter. I spend a lot of time out there, and it's Yvette Owo. Pretty straightforward. I'm also the only person in the world with the name, so that helps. And you can also connect with me on LinkedIn, although I spend more time on Twitter, but I'm getting back to my LinkedIn roots. And I'd love to hear from you if you're in the space, if you want help looking at a deal, if you want help with QOV, quality of earnings, that's financial due diligence. Definitely reach out.
Yvette, thank you so much for your time. Congratulations on your first acquisition of many to come. And we'll talk soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yvette, for joining me for this conversation. And thank you to everyone for listening. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to connect with Yvette and myself. And please like, rate, review, subscribe to this show on whatever platform you are listening to it or viewing it on. I'd also like to mention that I'm an SBA loan broker, so if you are looking for financing for your next acquisition, feel free to get in touch. As Yvette discussed in this episode, it is so important to find a lender that you are comfortable working with, and an advantage to working with a broker is that you get one point of contact that gives you access to many lenders. So if you're looking for some SBA financing options, let's connect.